So today we'll be having 3 sessions, and basically now the session together here, and it'll be a common session, and afterwards we'll get to know you. You'll have to introduce yourself right now, but we'll get to know you and what level of expertise you are in. If you are a first timer, basics, then again if you are a medium level, if you would like to learn more. And so after the second session we'll divide up. Those who are into basics, then they'll be here, and those who are into advanced level, they'll go inside over there. I think you kindly introduce yourselves. Let us start off with right here in the front and go like that. Yes.
Hi, I'm Vikul from Parametric Research.
Okay.
My name is Ramyan, and I'm from Dimapur, and I'm from LEF Church.
Okay.
I'm Chimran from Parametric Research. I'm Xlr Cables. I'm from Parametric Research.
Hello, my name is Piyuto and I'm from Highland Baptist Church.
Yes.
My name is Kisigo and I'm from Highland Baptist Church.
Begin.
My name is Vigadio. I am from Highland Baptist Church, and this is my first time.
Hello everyone, my name is Tuba and Yamito. I'm beginner. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jososaki Jo. I'm from Jasan Baptist Church, Kohima, and I'm just a beginner.
Hello everyone, I'm Mego and I'm beginner from City Church.
Hi, my name is Vitoto and I'm from UBC and I'm a beginner.
Hello everyone, my name is Moa and I'm from PowerCom and in the beginner level.
My name is Akamba, from Church.
My name is Tijamato. I am from Ebenezer Baptist Church.
Hello, my name is Kedio and I'm from Ebenezer Baptist Church. Beginner.
Hello everyone, my name is Junzo and I'm from Highland Baptist Church, Kohima.
Well, my name is Mr. El Kino and I'm from Highland Baptist Church, Kohima.
I'm Reverend Tangalo from Puma Baptist Church, beginner.
Okay, so now I hand over the time to Richard and Ryan.
Yeah, it's good to have each one of you here, and everyone's beginner. So it's good, and we're gonna get to you and teach you some of the stuff that's really from the basic of sound engineering when it comes to cabling, to setting up sound, to setting up equipment. And I would like to know if you are already doing something with some church in audio. If you can just feel free to communicate with me. You can stand up and talk to me. There's no way, it's not a thing. Just feel free to talk and communicate. So if you are doing something with sound already in the church, you can just let me know the kind of equipment you're using and the kind of sound that you're doing in the church. Anyone?
In my church, I handle the sound system.
Okay.
That's all.
Okay. We'll start you with basic, and you can take down notes and stuff like that. And if you at any point of time you want to ask a question, you can go ahead and stand up and ask, and we will fill you in with all the details. Right? Yeah, but feel free to talk. I mean, it's okay. I mean, you don't have to just sit so quiet. I mean, talk to me. Okay, talk to us, and we will help you. Down the session. All right. All right. There are 2 types of sound setups that you can do. One is for indoor, and one is for a live performance. So setting up an indoor system, you can use a passive or you can use active speakers. Active is our speakers which have already built-in power amps and stuff like that. So you just need a mixer to run it through, and for a normal system that is passive, you need amplifiers, you need a board, you need stuff like that to hook up. Now, there are different types of boards that you can use, analog and digital. There are different types of equalizations that are on the board, depending on the kind of model you buy. So these are the kind of things that are there in the boards. But some of the churches only have amplifiers and just direct microphones where you plug in, and you don't have a mixer, and just a couple of speakers, and that's how you do your sound. But at any point in time, you want to expand, you want to set up a different system, we're going to teach you how to do that. So you can get a mixer, you can get a different kind of microphones that you can use for choirs. Since you're all from church, for choirs there are different microphones. For solos there are different microphones, and for miking of instruments there are different kind of microphones. So these are the things that are used for choirs and stuff like that, or for live performances. But live performances you have a different setup, where you have a three-way system, or take a three-way system because analog. Let's say analog is the older system that we used to use earlier. Now it's all changed to digital. But analog systems where you use crossovers and you use a whole lot of processors, different type of processors, where you have a crossover where you can break up into the low frequencies, the mid frequencies, and the high frequencies. So you have a three-way system where you can actually separate your mid and high and low frequencies. So when you run the sound, you use crossovers, the setting of the crossovers, the cutoff points and stuff. That is what we will show you. All right, on the once we get the net back. So these are the kind of things that are involved in live and studio performance. Now live also you have monitoring, which runs through the mixer from different sends from the board for a fallback. So in a church you use fallback, you have monitors. Let me say monitor speakers, where you put monitors and you want to run back monitors. That's a different setup again. So you have a different setup for that monitoring system. So we're going to show you and explain to you how to use monitoring and setting time delays between the main system and the monitor, so you don't get a double sound, you don't get interference, you don't get feedbacks. We're going to show you how to do anti-feedbacks and stuff like that. So it all runs really good without any of the system giving you a problem. Then I'm going to teach you how to do troubleshooting, where you have, when you're running a system, sometimes there's a noise in the system and you don't know where it's coming from. So you've got to run around and find. But the easiest way is if you know your cabling and stuff like that, how to make your cabling, how to configure the connections in the cables, in the connectors, kind of connectors that you use for the system. And these are the things that help, where you use balanced inputs, unbalanced inputs. For guitars, it's a different connection. For a microphone, it's a different connection. So miking amplifiers, taking line outs from using DI boxes and stuff like that is what you need to know. So these are the things that are being used. Now I'm sure in your church, all of your churches, there is a sound system. All right. So talk to me. Tell me what are the things that you've heard on that system. What are the problems that you're having in the church, and I'll try and help you, so you can go back to your church and help them. So if anyone has a question or anyone has a thing, you can go ahead and ask me. No one?
Okay, maybe, question, yeah. One of the main challenges or struggles that we face in the church is handling the feedbacks and the noise that come out from the output speakers. So, I'm not that much of an experience. I don't have that much experience in handling sounds and all that. But I've tried to work around that and trying to place the monitor speakers. Trying to find that sweet spot where you don't have the feedbacks coming out. But still, you still struggle with that. So.
Okay. How many of you are musicians here? Anyone? Guitars, keyboard, drums? Anyone?
Sort of here.
Guitars? Anyone else? Musicians? Good. I think most of you guys somewhere connected with music. So settling your feedback is depending the distance between your microphone and your monitor. Let's say if you're getting a feedback from the monitor, you check your monitoring there, and you have to actually cut off the frequencies that are disturbing you. Yeah, so we've got stuff here that he'll show you, and we'll put it up on the screen so you can see it, and you can get to know how it's actually done. So what's the kind of setup you have at your church? Do you have a choir, or do you have musicians?
We have a choir and the worship band also.
Okay.
And I think especially with the choir, we use three condenser mics.
How many voice choir do you have?
Around 20 to 25.
20 to 25. And how many microphones are you? You're probably doing parts. You're doing your soprano, tenor, alto,
all the parts.
So, have you got them separated, or do you have them all together?
We have them all together in one.
All together in one place. But do you have your altos in one section and sopranos in one section?
Yes.
All right. So how do you mic them, and what kind of?
Right now we are using three condenser mics, which we hang from the top, from the ceiling, and we have about 4 dynamic mics in front of the choir.
Okay.
I think the problem mostly comes from trying to increase the volume of the condenser mics. That's where the feedbacks come from, and I've been trying to work that out, but it just seems quite impossible for me at the moment. So.
Okay. So what board are you using? Are you using mixer or?
Yes, and Mackie analog mixer.
Mackie analog.
Yeah.
What's the model that you're using?
I forgot actually. It's MK something 20 or something like that. I don't remember actually.
Okay. Condensers and unidirectional mics, when they cancel out each other and stuff like that, you get a lot of things happening with the microphones. Okay. So we'll show you how to get rid of the feedbacks. And are you using an equalizer?
Yes.
How many band equalizer are you using?
I think it's a 12 band. I think 12 or 10. I don't remember. Okay. It's around there.
Faders? How big are the faders? Is it big or small faders?
They're big faders.
Anyone else?
In our church we use inverter.
Okay.
So when current goes off, it produces one sound.
Okay, that's because the voltage is low. The voltage is not correct. So when the voltage is low, it's like a humming sound that comes from the system. It's not able to take the load.
The problem which we are facing is it's not able to match with our mixture, which is Studio Master. Okay. We are using Studio Master. Okay. So the high frequency is too high. Even if we cut off up to 0, it's still high. Okay. So that's the problem we are facing right now. Okay. Any solution to that?
Okay. Anything on cabling? You want to know anything on cabling, configuration, how to make your cables, how to do soldering, how to do... Please ask me, I'll tell you how to do it. It's very important your cabling is correct, or you can have the best of system and it will never work correctly if your cabling is bad.
Okay, hi guys, my name is Ryan. I'll be conducting your advanced and basics of audio engineering. Okay, so does any one of you have like basic knowledge on audio engineering, like basics as in equalization, dynamics, connections, knowledge on hardware, amplification, speakers, any of that sort of stuff? Everyone's blank. You guys have come for audio engineering class?
See, I think I will just, my situation I will tell you. Basically, I'm not into this sound system stuff. I'm a photographer, but our church needed, someone to look after the system. So that's why I just volunteered to help out with the sound system without knowing anything. So we have a mixture, which basically I do volume control. Wiring, everything is done by others. So sometimes I face problem because I don't know how is the connection. Because we use ampli also. So we have both active and passive. So sometimes I get confused with the connection. So that is my problem. And of course I don't know much about the microphone and all those things, and different kind of mixture sound system. So basically I'm here just to know. So if when you are teaching, maybe some pictures, if you show maybe.
What we'll do is, see, I'm here to go on a one-to-one basis. I can sit with you, give you a short time, and work with you on that part, so you get to know. Because if I just put it up on the screen and you take notes, you go back, you'll not learn anything. So I'm ready to sit with you for even 10-15 minutes. In fact, if each one of you. So if you have anything, I'll sit with you and I'll teach you how to do it. Or both of us will teach you how to do it. So you don't have to worry about it. So just give us a rundown of what you have, and we'll take it from there.
Okay. What is sound? Any rough idea from y'all's point of view?
Disturbance caused in the air.
I've got a lot of answers to that as noise pollution. So now sound is vibration. It travels through air, distance, meter, solid, liquids, things like that. Now this, my presentation here, it shows you the exact figures of sound and dispersion, how it travels, how you listen to it, the decibels, the time it takes to reach your ears. Okay, a lot of you guys have problems in feedbacks, like I heard you saying earlier. Now that is caused because of frequencies that are not required. How many of you all know what is a GEQ? No? Okay, now if you take a look at it, this is what sound looks like when it travels. Although you can't see it, you can hear it. But in my table, this is how sound travels. You have a plus point of sound traveling and you have a minus point. So everything is on a plus and minus. So the higher the waves, the bigger the wavelength, the louder the sound. You guys are used to putting up a fader, turning a few controls and fine. Right or wrong? Someone respond. We are in an audio class. At any point, feel free to stop me, ask me a question. I'll clear your doubts. So that once you go back and head behind a console, it becomes easier for you all to understand what is there in front of you and what you're working with. Yeah. So if you have any issues, any complicated questions, please ask me. Now, sound is vibration. Vibration travels through walls, it travels through air. And depending upon how your atmosphere is, the sound changes. In a cold environment, your sound is completely different. In a hot environment, it's completely different. And in a rainy environment, it's completely different. Okay. Now mixing is a process where we have multiple inputs, we have single inputs. Okay. Now what we have in single inputs and multiple inputs, we have something called as a channel strip on our mixers. As you all have used, whoever has used a mixer and whoever has not, you have something called as a channel strip where you have on a basic mixer. A channel strip is something where you have a gain control, you have an equalizer, you have two auxiliary sends, you have an effects, you have something called as a pan, which is a balance between your left speaker and your right speaker. Okay. Now once we get this on screen, I'll just explain to you what the individual knobs do. Now we have a 16 channel mixer. Now these are 16 individual inputs. In your 16 individual inputs, you have something called as your channel strip. This is your channel strip. Okay. Now in your channel strip, this is your gain control. Okay. So basically, this is your input. Okay. So this is where your audio feed is coming in from. Let it be a mic or a guitar or any instrument. Okay. So this is where your input comes in. It's a balanced in. Then we have something called as an unbalanced input, which is your phono jacks. This is line level input. So line level input is a little less. The gain on that is a little less. Then we have our cutoff switch, which is a low frequency cutoff. So
go back to the mixer.
Go back to the. So you have a low cut, okay, at 35 Hertz, and then you have your gain control. So your gain control, what this gain control does is it amplifies the input, the signal that's coming from your source is being amplified through this control. Okay. You have two sets of controls. One is your input line level and then comes your equalizer. Okay. This is your EQ. You have, this is a 4-band equalizer where you have a mid-sweep parametric. Okay. Now this is your high frequency. This is the gain of your mid frequency, and this is the frequency that you want to choose your mid at. Okay. Then you have something called as a low frequency, which is your bass. So basically you have highs, mids, and lows. Okay, then you have two auxiliary sends, which is your monitors on stage to make whoever is on stage listen to whatever they're performing, or voice, music, whatever it may be. Then you have your balance, which is the left speaker and the right speaker. Then you have a mute button, you have a PFL, which is your headphones, and then you have a fader. So basically your input gain is your line level input, where is the source. So this is what you play with. You set this to how much input you want in your console. Okay, so as much as input as you want, then comes your equalization, how you want it to sound. This is very important. The equalizer part is very important, because without this, by sending sound to a monitor, you'll have feedbacks, what you were talking about. So if you know what the sound of your speaker is, then you equalize to that. You equalize your speaker, your input instruments to according to whatever it sounds like, so that you don't have a feedback. Okay. Then comes your monitoring. After your equalization, then your balance. Then you place it on whichever speaker you want, your left speaker, your right speaker, and then it comes down to how clean you want your mix to sound. So the cleaner it is, and the way it's equalized, it sounds much better. Any questions? Okay. So, like I was saying, you have two types of speaker configuration as well. You have active speakers, you have passive speakers. Now, in passive speakers, you have different kinds of models of passive speakers. Then you need a crossover, you need a graphic equalizer, then you need an amplifier, then comes your mixer. So, these are the basic stuff of a passive system. In an active system, it's all built in. Your crossover points and everything already set. So, that's the difference between your active and passive. No one knows what's a GEQ? No? Okay, now a graphic equalizer is a device where you have 31 different frequencies. Okay, right from 20 Hertz to 20 kilohertz, and within that bandwidth you have a bunch of frequencies that disturb you during your event or your sound check, which needs to be cut off. Okay, let's get to the basics of sound. Like I was explaining earlier, you have a microphone, which is your source, right? So your source is either a microphone or a guitar or a bass guitar or whatever it may be, whatever instrument it may be. Then we have a mixing console. Then you have a digital signal processor, okay, a DSP controller. Then we have an amplifier, and then comes your speakers. So most of you will be confused trying to figure out what is a digital signal processor. I'll get to that a little later in the session, in the second half. But as of now, you have a mixing console, okay, without any processing, that's going directly into your amplification, correct? So how do we fix that? How do we, any idea? How do you correct a speaker that's not been equalized or treated properly without any processing to it? Okay, like I was explaining earlier, your graphic equalizer and your mixer. If you understand what the graphic EQ does, you can make a speaker sound good, and you can cut off all your feedbacks and all the disturbance noises not required in your mix. Okay, so these are like the basics of analog boards that we use. We've got a Midas, we have an Allen and Heat, we have a Soundcraft, we have a Yamaha, two different models of a Yamaha. So each board has a different kind of equalizer on it. Now you have a normal equalizer, we have a parametric equalizer. A parametric equalizer has a frequency ratio where you can select a particular frequency and cut it. Now frequencies are signals that are being produced that are not required in your mix. So you can use the GEQs on your board to correct that. Okay. So every board has a different kind of GEQ and a parametric EQ. Like if you take the Midas console, you have a 6-band equalizer. If you take the Yamaha, you have a 3-band equalizer. If you take the Allen and Heath, you have a 4-band equalizer. So every board, the bigger the consoles get, the more equalizers, the more outputs, the more inputs you get in there. We have different kinds of hardware. Okay. Like for example, these are called compressors, de-essers, and noise suppressors. Now, this hardware helps you rectify things and make it sound better in different ways. Now, back in the days, we never had digital mixers like how we have now. Okay. We used to put racks of these hardware and they were connected to our consoles with a 31-band EQ. And not only that, you'll at least have a rough idea as to what these things can do for you in a mix. Okay. Now, when this hardware is connected to your console, you can individually control your channels, and not only that, you can also make it sound good. Okay. So this hardware, once it's connected to your board, you have an option to control the amplitude of your input, and you can compress your input, you can gate your input, and much more things than that.
It's an analog board, and most of the people in the church, they are using these analog boards here. When using analog boards, we were told that we need to put the pots right up in 0 dB, and even all these ones, whatever you're using in 0 dB, right? Correct. To make use of the electronics within the board.
Right.
And so that only after that you adjust the volumes from here using the gain, right? Gain is here, right? Correct. So I wanted to know, is that applicable to digital boards also, or is it only in analog boards that we need to use this principle, you know? Whereas maybe digital boards, they are already incorporating, even though you use it below level also, they are having the full effects of the electronic within the board, right? So my question is, whether you guys know that you need to put these pots all in 0 so that it makes full use of the board. That's my first question to you guys. And then you adjust your volume or your gain using this one, you know? So that's my question, and also my question to you was whether that's applicable to digital boards.
Okay. Now, you're talking about first putting your fader up to 0 decibels and then adjusting your gain. It's actually the other way around. You first adjust your gain and see what is your level, input level. Your input level should always be
from the mics,
from the microphone or your source should always be at -3 dB, which you have a level indicator on your mixer. On all mixers you have a level indicator, and if you all notice and if you all actually take a look closely on your console, you'll have a button that says AFL or PFL. Now the moment you press that, the moment you enable it, it shows you the level indicator of your source. Okay. Now the moment you start seeing green, it's a cold signal. Okay. So that means your signal is not very high. You have a decent sound flow or audio flow of your instrument or your source that's coming into your board. The moment it starts hitting yellow, that means, okay, you know, you should start stopping here. Yeah. The moment it hits red, you have a very hot input, meaning your source is very hot, and you're gonna have cracking, distortion, you'll have noises which you cannot control even if you try to do. Now, if you want to adjust that, you first keep your faders down, you check your source level, how much signal is coming into your channel. You adjust your gain control according to that. Let it be a digital console or an analog console. In digital consoles, it shows you the level. You don't have to enable any buttons. It shows you on the channel strip or on the meter bridge. Since it's a smaller console, you don't have a meter bridge, you just have a single meter bridge over here. So you have a PFL or an AFL button or a solo button on your console. The moment you enable that, you get to see your source input. Okay? And the moment you start seeing your source input, once you set it at -3 dB or -6 dB or 0, then you can push your faders up, your individual faders up to as much as you feel it's needed. Because if you have enough gain, then you have enough headroom to play around with the faders. If your source is soft and if you push a fader up full and turn your gain up, then that one particular instrument or source is going to get louder. Okay? So first set your gains. That's very important. The moment you set your gains, then you put up your faders and balance it out. Yeah? Like how loud a guitar should be, how loud a drum kit should be, how loud a bass guitar should be. So this is a very important thing, that it's like basics 101 on sound. You should know how much of gain and how much of input is coming into your console.
Anything on the board that you would have a question about, or connections of the board that you would have a question about?
Okay, just coming back to the GEQ. You said that earlier, that using the GEQ we can cut the noises and the feedbacks.
Right.
And according to the frequencies that's causing all this, the problems. My question would be, how do you find out which is the frequency that's causing the feedback? The high and the low frequencies, how do you identify that?
You have something called as an RTA meter. It's called a real-time analyzer. Now this I will explain to you all. If you use this real-time analyzer, this is going to show you all the 31 bands right from 20 Hz to 20 kHz, and in the range, whether it's your low frequency or your low mid, your high mid and your highs, if it's in that range, you get to cut that. You have to cut that. This I'll explain to you how it works, and I'll also give you a demo of it. Once your speakers are analyzed, it reduces and cuts off frequencies that are not required. It makes your speakers sound flat. No bass, no mid, no high. So what you do on your mixer, that's the sound that you will get on your speakers.
Yeah, as I said earlier, I've been watching a lot of YouTube tutorial videos and all that, and they all have different opinions on how to use the GEQ and the mixer, the fader strip, the channel strip, and some would say keep the GEQ flat and you play around with the channel strip. The others, they would say keep the channel strip flat and then you move around with the GEQ. So a little confused there. I don't know which way is the right way to do it.
The first thing you do is you first use the GEQ.
Okay.
You have to first use the GEQ. Then you use the equalizer on your mixer. Because in your GEQ you have 31 bands. And on your mixer you have 4 to 6 bands. So first you use the GEQ, then you use the equalizer on your console. This is the basic of a stage setup. Okay. Your basic stage setup would be your stage, your main PA speakers, your stage monitors, your source, which are your microphones, as I was explaining earlier. Then you have your crowd, and then you have your console. Okay. So this is a very basic setup where you have 4 monitors on stage, 4 auxiliary sends from your console, and you have your main PA left and right, and then you have monitors, and then you have your console where all your all your inputs are coming from the stage into your mixer through a snake box. Okay. Now, this is the kind of setup that you'll have in your church, right?
Some of them would.
Yes. Has anyone gone for a live concert?
Yes.
You guys are into music, right? Now you're smiling. Okay. So, since you all are into music, then you all would have definitely gone for these big concerts, right? When bands and all play. You all have felt the sound hit you all, right?
Yes.
Why?
Because it's loud.
No? In a way, yeah. Okay. Any other reasons?
Because it's a vibration.
Okay. Vibration. Wavelength in low frequencies. Okay. Now, your subs, your subwoofers, those are your low frequencies. Okay. That's what pushes the air. Okay. That's what pushes the air so that you feel the bass. Okay. And then you have your mids and your highs which carry the sound along with that. Okay. So you have three segregations of sound in your PA system, which is your highs, your mids and your lows. Okay. It's something like this. You have your low frequencies, you have your mid frequencies, and then you have high frequencies. Okay. These three elements make a speaker box, a cabinet. Okay. So every cabinet has a different wattage, a different input, impedance, these kind of things. Now, when you connect this to an amplifier, it amplifies the sound to get much louder so that the sound can travel to the end. Okay. Maximum your speaker would throw is around 60 meters to 58 meters. Beyond that, you would have to put a delay stack for your sound to carry on further. But we have line array systems which are directional sound, and then you have your stacks. I think you all are aware of these speakers, right? You all use this. Most of you guys use this, right? What do you have anything to say? So yeah, so basically you use your stack speakers. Now, how do you get a stack speaker sounding right?
Just one question. What should be the distance between the speaker and the ampli and mixtures? So basically we use the mixtures and amplifier, but all the equipments are just in front of the stage, just near the stage.
Okay.
So we put it, the amplifier, mixture, everything just near the speakers.
Okay.
So since we don't have what we call a snake cable, you know.
Correct.
So should we use snake cable, and that should be the certain distance should be there, or how we'll have to use?
Good question. Okay. Now, when you plug up your system, when you connect your system, you should. It's always recommended that you do use a snake, which is actually required because it makes life easier. Otherwise, you have one too many cables to pull to the stage. So by the time you look at the connections from your mixer to the stage, you have so many of them, and it's hard to rectify an issue. How many of you all have had that problem after you all connect the mixer with so many wires to the stage and you all don't know where the sound is coming from? Anyone? Now when you use the snake, it makes it easier because you just run one thick cable from your console to the stage. Okay. So you have a snake box where you have all your inputs from the stage go into that, and that gets connected to your mixer. Now generally when you're setting up a sound system, you keep your amplifiers behind your speakers so that you don't lose out on the power that's being driven to your speakers through your amps. And your console should always be in the center of a venue at 30 meters. That is the only way you will be able to understand how loud your sound is, how much of distance you're covering, and how clear your mix is. Because if your mixer is in front of the stage, it becomes hard for you to judge these kind of things, because you're listening to it from the front, you may find it sounding good, right? You'll say, wow, it sounds great from here. But once you go back, when you start walking further into a ground or further into an auditorium, it starts sounding completely different, right? Because you're not actually calculating the sound from the back, you're calculating the sound from the front. And basically sound, it runs on calculation. Distance, throw, and SPL. Okay. SPL stands for sound pressure level, which is how loud your speaker gets. Now this is SPL. If you understand this, this is what a speaker is all about. Okay. I think if you'll go to a shop, they talk about it being 1000 watts, 500 watts. Sometimes it's not always about the wattage of the speaker. It's about the SPL, how loud it gets. Even a lower wattage speaker has a very high SPL. And a higher wattage speaker has a higher SPL, or it may sound as loud as the one that's got a softer SPL. You know, a softer, a less wattage. So these are the things that matter in your sound system. Before I continue, any other questions?
Okay, I want to ask you a question. When I increase the volume of monitor feedback system,
okay,
that if I off, then I can even increase that front side speaker volume. So what is the reason?
Okay, because you have your fader on pre and post. Okay. Your mixer contains a button that says pre-post. And what console are you using? Yamaha, which one?
Max U 20
MC. You're using MG 122CX. 122 or 124? It's a big one, blue color?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 24 channels?
20.
That's a MG 224. Now that console has 4 auxiliaries on it and you have a pre-post button. Now pre-fader, this one. Yeah. So a pre-fader is when you put it on pre, you can send sound to your monitor without the faders. Okay. So if you switch on, if you enable that button, if you push your fader down, you can send sound to your monitor without having to push the fader up. So the main PA system, you can balance it out after you're done setting your monitors. Okay. Now, if you do not have a G equalizer or graphic EQ connected to your monitors, then you keep your fader on post. So what happens is your monitor and your PA system works with the fader. So now when you control your fader, your monitor level also changes. So probably they tell you make it louder, so you push it up, it starts feedbacking.
Let me say something.
Yeah.
Going back to what we were talking about just a few minutes ago about the snake, and about being in front of the stage as opposed to being out in the audience somewhere. One thing I notice in Nagaland a lot, and sometimes it's the pastor that forces this, but it's really a good idea for for you as the engineer to not be behind glass or way up in a balcony. The optimal place you would want to be is where the audience is. So if you can be, in the center of the audience, about two-thirds way back into the audience, that's going to be the best place for you to be, because you're hearing what the audience is hearing. If you're up in a balcony, then you're going to get what the balcony is hearing. Down below, it might sound terrible, but up in the balcony, because you're mixing there, it sounds great. If you're behind a glass wall, I've seen one church in Dimapur that's like this. They're completely buried behind glass, and that glass is stopping you from using your ears. So I know there's some limitations for a lot of churches, but if you have an option to be able to move your board into a place that is closer to where the audience is, where they're listening to, you're always going to have a better mix.
Okay, before I get back to SPL, I was talking about cables, right, earlier. Xlr cables and balanced and unbalanced cables. Now, most of you all use cables like this, jack to jacks. Now this is a mono cable. Okay, a mono cable is a single source input. Okay. Now we use these cables for our keyboards, our guitars, connecting a device to another device. Sometimes it's a speaker box to an amplifier, or your mixer to an amplifier, certain things like that. And XLR to XLR, this is your balanced input. Now why do we call it balanced input? Any answers? Now if you notice, there are 3 pins on this. Okay. It's a ground, it's a left and a right. So that's 2 inputs. Okay. So it's a left input and a right input. So it makes the input source clear, and it's much heavier and it sounds good. So when you use a XLR cable, it's called balanced input. Okay. These are called balanced inputs. These are called unbalanced inputs. Okay. So sometimes you'll have issues because your mixer or a device that you use has a balanced input and you're feeding it an unbalanced input. That's why it doesn't sound right or it doesn't function properly. You have feedback problem. You have low input problem, and these cables are actually very important. If you notice in your hardware, in some of your mixers, you have a phono jack input on your board that sometimes takes a stereo in or a mono in. Okay, it says balanced and unbalanced. So sometimes if you put a stereo jack which has, over here you have 1 tip and 1 ring, and in a stereo you have 1 tip and 2 rings. So what happens is you have a ground, you have a left and a right, so that once you put it in, you get both the channels of your input source. Yeah? So it makes your device function properly. If you don't use a proper cable, if you don't understand how you should connect your device properly, I will explain all this to you in the second half, how we're going to do our connections, how we could make different cables, okay, and what kind of cables can be used for certain scenarios. Like when you're on stage, if you're patching up a guitar pedal, which I think most of you all have. Anyone's got a guitar pedal? No?
Yeah, just we will be using it.
Okay. So in your church, your guitarist brings a guitar pedal, right? If you all notice, some of them have 1 single output and some of them have 2 outputs, which says left oblique mono and right. The moment you give the left source, you get a mono signal into your console. The moment you plug left and right, you're getting 2 sources into your board. Okay, so then you pan them out left and right to your PA system, and you get a proper heavy signal that is being distributed equally between your PA system. You have a question?
I don't know. I need to explain or not. Just now. That fact, we have 2 outputs.
Correct.
And then when we plug in this mixture, we have only 1. So in order to do that, I just make this one side. I just put the bulb and plug it this side, and then put that right, left, and right. So is there any harm?
Okay, so you have a jack-to-jack cable which is one side a mono and the other side is left and right.
Yes, I made it.
You made it.
Why cable? Where why cable?
Okay. That because only left side sound come.
Okay.
So if I do like that, 2 sound come out.
Okay. So when you're using a cable like that, you're actually shorting out 2 connections. You're trying to put 2 positive connections together. You may hear the sound, but it's technically not correct. Okay. So for that you have to have a balanced cable. Okay. You have to have a left and a right. Then you get a proper sound coming out of your device. If you short a device like that, if you cross connect it, your device is going to get damaged.
For such thing, what kind of cable we have to use?
You have to use two mono cables like this. Like for example, you're using one of this, right?
Yeah.
This one's going into your mixer.
Yeah.
And you have another connection that's going into your pedal, right?
But when I open and see, the way I fix it, that one same money. Because they did it later.
Okay.
It was a purchase from shop. Music store.
Okay. That's still an unbalanced input if you notice it, because if you're using one phono jack that's like this, and the other sides are two, it's still an unbalanced signal. It's not balanced.
What pedal is it? What pedal is it?
What pedal is it?
Effect, mixer effect.
No, is it zoom? Or is
Zoom,
it
yeah, zoom.
zoom? Does that have an Xlr out?
No. So for these kind of things, like your keyboards, for example, when you'll plug a keyboard, always take two outputs out of your keyboard, not one. So that way, when you have two inputs balanced between your left speaker and your right speaker, you get the full octaves of your keyboard. You start to hear the full keyboard. Otherwise, if you notice, you only hear, most of the time you hear more of the low end, and the high end is like very sharp. Let's say yours, you have to trim it off. That's because you're getting a mono signal. When you use both the signals, it gets properly balanced between the left side of your keyboard and the right side of your keyboard. The same thing happens with your guitar pedals.
Nothing. I use this one. That
XLR?
Yeah, XLR now with this.
XLR to phono jack.
That's a unbalanced.
That is balanced cable to an unbalanced cable. So basically, the output that's coming out of your keyboard is still unbalanced, but going into your mixer is balanced, but you're still getting a mono signal. We use something called a DI box, a direct insert box. Now these, I didn't know you had this. Okay. Now, has anyone seen this before?
Yes.
For the people who have? Okay. For the people who have not, this is called a DI box. Very important, very safe for your sound setups. Let it be indoors, outdoors, or a studio. It's very safe. Reason being is because this can convert a balanced signal to an unbalanced signal and give you a balanced output, a proper balanced output. Okay. This runs on a battery or something that's called a phantom power. You'll have seen a phantom, a plus 48 volts on your mixer.
Yes.
Okay. This runs with that. Okay. Now, this functions. The functionality of this is basically we keep it for safety, so that our power doesn't travel from either side. If current is flowing from your keyboard or any source that's there on stage that contains current, if there is a leakage of power, that's going to get into your mixer directly and is going to spoil a channel of yours. Okay. Now, if you use this stops that from happening. Okay. There is a cutoff inside it. It does not let power pass through this and get into your console. So if any damages happen, it happens to this. And not only that, you have a few switches on this, okay, which you can use to cut off like very hot signals coming from your stage. Like I was saying earlier, suppose you have very hot signals coming in, like your guitars or keyboards or any other instrument that are burning red, and when you turn the gain down, it's still burning red. Has anyone come across that? Yes. It's still burning red. You can't control it. How do you reduce it? If you use a DI box, you have a minus 20 dB cutoff switch on this. So the moment you enable it, it gets softer by 20 dB. By 20% it gets softer. Then you have a ground and lift. Suppose you have a buzz coming out of your guitar, which generally happens. When the moment you plug in your guitar pedal to your mixer, you have a buzzing sound. You can't fix that. You can't fix it. So if you enable that, that enables a ground that cuts off that buzz. Okay.
But the volume will decrease, or how the volume will descend?
You have a cutoff switch on this. It's up to you. if your signal is too high that's coming into your mixer, then you enable this. But if the signal flow into your console is the same, then you don't need to enable it. It stays the same. They give you a feature which is ground lift, so you can cut off any buzzing noise that comes from your device. These things are very important to have around with you.
Those are great for bass players because almost the bass is always clipping on the floor.
Always clipping.
That takes care of it just very quickly.
I have a question to do with the sound mixing, and I mean while we're doing the sound mixing and the sound check, which should we do first, the stage monitors or the house speakers?
You always first do the stage monitoring.
Okay.
First you set your levels on your console. Very important. First get your source of sound into your console. See that first you do a line check. First check your mixer. Put up all the faders. Check the lines to see there's no buzzing sound. If your signal is passing correctly into your mixer. Then you'll start adjusting the gains. How much of input is going to come into your board. After that, you'll start checking, individual channels. Then you start putting your monitoring, Then after you start putting your monitors up, you switch the PA off so that the band is still, or the artist is still listening to what's happening, what they're playing. Then you ask them what they need. What gets louder on stage? You want more vocals? You want more bass? You want more guitars? You want more keyboard? Then after you're done balancing the stage out, then you bring your PA back in. Yeah. So then, the band or the artist is getting a reference between their monitors and the PA system. So that will solve your monitoring issue, and that way you get to set the exact amount of sound for the stage. So you know how loud the stage is. So you don't have to turn up anything a little extra. In case if they do need it, then in the mix you can increase it slightly so that they are very comfortable on stage. So these things are very important to know.
Can I add something to that? This has nothing to do with the technical side of it. In the U.S., we had a practice on a Thursday, and then we had a Saturday and Sunday service. Me as a technician, on that Thursday, I would spend more time down on the stage, going back to my board and making adjustments, and going back down to the stage and making sure that artists are comfortable with their mix. One of the very most important things as a sound engineer is that you have a good relationship with the people that you are helping. If there is a trust issue, they'll always have a complaint. They'll complain that this doesn't sound right. I don't know what it sounds, but it just doesn't sound right. Or there'll be some complaint from the pastor or somebody. I spend more time as a sound engineer. I wouldn't say hand-holding, but sometimes you have to do that. You have to work with the singer or the bass player or the guitarist or whoever to make sure that they're happy with their sound. And if you get to the point week in and week after, they'll just trust you. They won't so much complain. They'll just know, hey, Bob's on it. He'll take care of it. But if you get to that position and you're walking down to the stage, I always walk, right where the singer is. He's singing right here. I'm literally right here listening to what he's listening to, and then I'll with my own ear, I'll know, okay, she really can't hear the keyboard, so let me go ahead and walk over to my board and turn up the guitar a little bit into the monitor. If you get to the position where you're listening to what they're listening to, most of the time they're not going to complain. And then the Sunday morning practice is when I really start listening to more of the audience.
Empty auditorium mix and a full auditorium mix, or when your church service, you're having a rehearsal, is always empty, just the band and you guys and a few other people around. So when you'll start doing your sound check and when the band is doing their rehearsals, it seems very noisy and loud. Right? It echoes. There is an echo and there's a lot of resonating sound that causes quite a lot of feedback on your stage as well. Right? Now, when you have an open auditorium and when your venue is open, sound is just traveling, and if it's a closed auditorium, it's even worse because it's going to hit the wall and come back. When the place, wherever you're having a band playing or any such thing, or when it's full of people, it starts sounding better. Any reason why? Does anyone know?
The people, they absorb the sound.
Correct. Clothes absorb the sound. Okay. Because not every place is acoustically treated. Right? So if you were in a room and it didn't have carpeting on the wall, or if there wasn't any color on the wall, that's going to cause a lot of reflection. Okay. We call it reflection sound. So it reflects. So when you speak, like as of now I'm speaking, my voice is completely dead because you hear it and there's nothing extra with that. Right? But if this hall was not treated, it would echo. Because there is something called as a jargon. When you clap, it's sound that goes left and right, up and down, and front and backwards continuously at the same time. So it's sound traveling all over the room at the same time.
It's a step of hall.
Yeah.
We have to use volume, sound, or how?
When you're in an empty auditorium, or if you're in a church that echoes a lot when it's empty, then you have to balance your band or the artist or whoever's speaking. You have to balance it according to what you feel is sounding right. You have to cut the correct frequencies. You have to know what to cut and what to boost. Like, for example, if you speak into a microphone and you find there is too much of bass, there's a lot of bass in your microphone, you cut down the bass slightly. You just cut down the bass slightly. Because what happens is, generally what happens when people are when you're going to set up a microphone, how many of you have dropped mics? Come on, now I want a response. How many people have dropped down a microphone? I think one of you would have dropped or keep dropping microphones. Now what happens is, when you drop a mic, the diaphragm that's there gets stuck to the magnet. That makes the high end of your microphone, the mids and highs, it gets dampened because the diaphragm is not moving. When you speak, it can't actually get your full voice cut. That's why the microphone starts sounding very bass heavy. If you buy a new microphone and you put an old microphone and you check the difference, you'll understand what I'm talking about. We'll try and do that in the second half of our session and get an amp and a speaker. I'll show you how that works. Because if you have a microphone that's bass heavy, then you just have to cut the bass down. And a mixing tip for the guys who do mixing on stage. If anyone says there's too much of bass, or just increase the highs on my mixer, I want a little bit more highs in my monitor, or I want a little bit more mid in my mix. How do you do that? You don't turn the knobs up. You cut frequencies. Like, if anyone wants a little bit more highs in their voice, just trim the lows down a little bit. If anyone wants a little bit more lows in their voice, trim the highs down a little bit. Because those are the elements that are clashing and disturbing them on stage. And it solves your problem, because if you put up your fader, or if you put the auxiliary send up a little bit more, it will not feed back.
one thing to add. Just a small trick. If it's a church where they always complain it's too loud, and somebody says the bass is too loud, I usually turn everything else down but the bass. Turn all the other ones down. It reduces the volume. I'm sorry, the bass is too low. I bring everything else down, and then you reduce your volume by a couple of dB, and the church becomes happier because it's not as loud. So instead of turning up the bass and in a loud setting, you can turn everything else down.
So if you guys find anything a little too loud, bring the rest, bring that down. If anyone wants a little bit more of that one particular instrument, you bring the rest of the stuff down. So that way you're not damaging your amplifiers, you're not clipping your mixer, and you still have enough headroom in your console. So if you want to give them a little bit more during a particular point of time, you can. Now we have something called as subgroups on a mixer. You all analog would have seen subgroups, right? Now what a subgroup does is generally people put everything on a subgroup and give it like an auxiliary or give it for a microphone feed or something like that. But it makes your mix much easier to handle a vast number of channels. Okay. Suppose you have 4 groups on your mixer. It says group 1 and 2, group 3 and 4. Okay. Now you could take your full band, okay, or only your drums, or only your guitars or your vocals, and put them on a group and just control like 8 faders with just 2 of them. Yeah. So it's like instead of you trying to figure out how to control all the volumes because you have that many channels, you just switch all of them to a group, and you can either increase them or you could decrease them. Yeah. So that's what a subgroup does. So generally when we do multiple channel inputs, like somewhere around 36 to 48 of them, we have like 8 banks of groups. So we shift drums, bass, guitars, keys. So we have just 8 elements in our hand to play with. Like if we have 48 inputs, okay, you're not going to be able to control all 48 at the same time, right? So we group them up. Drums will be on my first fader, my guitars will be on my second fader. So as you look at the band on stage, you have that many controls on your console. So you can individually control the drums, the bass, the guitar, the keyboards. So it makes it easier for you to balance out your band and make it sound much more clear. Yeah. So suppose if you're having a 4-piece band, 4-piece, drums, guitars, keyboard, vocals, and a bass guitar. Take 5 guys. Okay. Now, what we do is, if suppose when your show starts, you find the vocals are a little too soft. Okay. The vocals are not coming out of the mix. What will you cut down? How will you know what to cut down? You're not going to bring all 38 channels or 20 channels right down, right? So you put these guys on a group. So if you find the band is too loud, you can just bring the band down and keep the vocals up. Yeah. So if you want to put a little bit more keyboards during a keyboard solo, or if you want a guitar solo, you can just individually play with all of them. So it makes it easier for you to balance out your band and make the mix sound as clean as possible. Any questions?
You said that we'll keep the keyboards in a group. So before coming to there, because if we keep in a group, then if once we move the fader or up and down, then it will move the volume of the keyboard in an overall position, right?
That's only for the outside, not for the inside. The group faders do not affect the monitors at all.
Oh.
It only affects the PA system.
So we have to first adjust the keyboard separately then?
Yes. So basically, like I was saying, the moment your keyboard comes into your mixer, then you equalize it to whatever you want. then you send the monitors to them as loud as they want it and as comfortable they are on stage with the sound. Once you're done with that, then you shift your channels to your group, right? So that if suppose you have like 4 faders of keyboards, you have 2 keyboards, you can't play with all 4 faders at the same time, right? You're not going to keep your 2 hands on faders moving them up and down, right? So you shift them to a group which makes it 1 fader. All 4 channels will go to 1 fader, and it becomes easier to control both the keyboards with just 1 fader. And that only affects the PA system. It does not have anything to do with your monitors.
When he says shift that channel or those keyboards over to a subgroup, there'll be a button on your board that says 1, 2, 3, 4. You can, or 5, 6, depending on how many groups you have. You can just press that button or enable it, and it'll be pushed over to that subgroup.
Yeah, and you also have a button that says LR or it says mix. You have to take it out of that mix, because what happens is you got a stereo button. The moment you enable that, the sound from that channel is coming to your master output. So if you want that to be dedicated just to that group, you have to get it out of the stereo mix and enable the group 1 and 2 or 3 and 4 or 5 and 6 as per whatever you want to shift your keyboards or guitars to. So the moment it is out of that mix, then your groups are going directly to your stereo. So it will not affect anything else on your console. It will just become an additional volume control of that particular mix. So you can just play with that. You don't need to touch any of the balance of the faders that are there on your console. Any questions?
Please. Apart from that equalizer,
yeah.
Apart from high, mid, low, there is one more. What is that?
That is a frequency. Yeah. Now that's your full mid frequency range. Like how you want your mid to sound. Like for example, if you have a ring, when someone says check, there's a ring. There's a ring when he says check. So according to that mid frequency, what you want to cut off, you set the gain up, you search for the frequency that's feedbacking, and then you cut it down slightly. So that takes away that ringing sound. So you have a high frequency, which is a set frequency. You have a low frequency, which is one set frequency, and you have a mid, which is a sweep, which you can sweep between that bandwidth, between that frequency range on your console.
Would you like to say something also, or
do you want to say something?
I've been saying, but I mean, just the only thing that I would add to the subgroup that we were talking about, and I was talking about volume earlier. In my church, in the U.S., I ran a 56-channel board and another 24-channel board next to it. For orchestra, for choir, we had usually a 10-piece band, and then up to 10 vocals up on the stage. It is impossible to keep track of all of those channels when you're mixing in a live setting. I always change the sound depending on the type of song it is. There's one song that is very heavy in electric guitar, where the other song it's very contemporary and more, keyboards and more into the vocals. Those subgroups are very important because instead of going and looking for those channels, even though they are labeled, it's still difficult. So with those subgroups, you can turn up the vocals on one song and bring down the electric. If earlier I mentioned the bass is too low, I'll just bring all of those other subgroups down a little bit, and then the bass increases. Your ear doesn't remember beyond 20 seconds. So somebody up on stage, they're like, hey, why did I turn down? But in a few seconds, they're not going to understand that their volume actually came down. So it's very useful. And it's very good for choir microphones. Just about everybody here uses microphones for choirs. Put those on a subgroup, because sometimes the band is too loud, and then you can try and push all of those 4 microphones or 6 microphones that are using up in that subgroup instead of adjusting them individually on the board. So subgroups are very important, and every church that I've consulted here in Nagaland, I always see those subgroups not being used, and that's one of your biggest assets on your board. So I would definitely encourage all of you to use those.
Question here again. Earlier you said about the ringing thing, the ringing sound. Does that usually come from the mid frequencies or?
Most of the times it comes from the high mid frequency range.
The high mid frequency. Okay. Thank you.
There's something in the room called a resonance frequency as well.
Okay.
And that's something that can be fixed inside a graphic CQ or parametric. Any last questions before we break for tea? Richard mentioned earlier that you can write down your questions and bring them forward. As we're breaking for tea, why don't you bring those and put them on the table, and
we'll answer all of them one by one.